So this happened last fall when I pulled into the Craggy Gardens Trailhead up on the Blue Ridge Parkway. September the 17th, 3:40 in the afternoon, and everything looked normal. The sun was out. The lot was half full, but when I came back from the hike, every single car window was fogged over, and pressed against the glass were faces, blank pale, grinding their teeth in unison like they were waiting for me. And the worst part, one of them had my face. You're listening to ASMR 404 Found. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. So this happened last fall when I drove up to the Blue Ridge Parkway Trailhead at Craggy Gardens in North Carolina. It was October 12th, 2022 at 4:37 p.m. and I still remember checking the time on my dash because the light was already starting to fade in that strange autumn way where the air feels thinner and colder than it should, and the mountains catch the last of the sun like jagged teeth catching fire. I had been meaning to take this hike for a while because I had read somewhere online that Craggy Gardens was one of those places that was beautiful in the fall when the leaves turned into these insane colors like bleeding orange and crimson red against the black ridges, and I wanted to see it for myself and maybe grab some pictures before the tourists swarmed it over the weekend. The parking lot was mostly empty when I pulled in, just one or two cars scattered across the cracked pavement, and the silence of the place hit me first. No bird song, no wind, just that low hum you sometimes get in the mountains, where the air feels like it is vibrating just outside the edge of hearing. And I remember thinking it was too quiet, but then telling myself I was just being dramatic because I had been driving for 3 hours and my head was buzzing from caffeine and podcasts. When I stepped out of the car, the chill hit me right away, and I zipped up my jacket, stuffing my camera into the side pocket of my backpack. And then I noticed this old blue sedan parked near the tree line, the kind of car that looked like it had been there since the 90s. Dusty windshield, rust around the wheel wells, no one inside, and for a second I thought maybe someone had left it abandoned. But then I noticed faint condensation on the driver's side window, like someone had been breathing inside not too long ago. I shook it off and walked toward the trail sign. The wood so weathered the carving was barely visible, but I knew I was in the right place. Craggy Gardens Trailhead. And I remember the smell, that heavy damp rot of wet leaves and earth, like the forest was soaking in its own decay, and it clung to the back of my throat as I started walking up the path. The trail was narrow and rocky, lined with twisted rhododendron tunnels that made these natural arches overhead, and stepping into them felt like stepping into a different world. The light dimmed instantly, and it was colder under the branches, like the sun couldn't reach me anymore, even though I had just left the open parking lot, and I could hear my boots crunching wet gravel in a way that echoed louder than it should have. Each step like I was disturbing something that wanted me to stay quiet. About 15 minutes in, I started to feel it, that prickling sense on the back of your neck that you're being watched, and I kept glancing back down the trail. But all I ever saw were the same twisted branches and fading light behind me. No movement, no figures. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It was like when you're a kid and you run up the basement stairs because you swear something is right behind you. Except here I couldn't run because the path was too steep and uneven. I tried to distract myself by pulling out my phone and snapping a few pictures, but every time I looked at the screen, the colors seemed wrong. The reds of the leaves looked darker, almost brown, and the greens were washed out, like the life had been drained from them, and one shot of the tunnel came out completely black, even though I swear there had been light when I pressed the shutter, just a void where the path should have been, and I deleted it right away because it made my stomach turn. The deeper I went, the stronger the smell of rot became. Not just wet leaves anymore, but something sharper like meat left out in the sun. And I remember pulling my jacket collar over my nose and telling myself maybe a deer had died off the trail somewhere. But the smell kept shifting, sometimes faint, sometimes overwhelming, like it was moving with me, circling me, never letting me walk out of it completely. Round the half-hour mark, I came to this clearing where the trees bent away from the trail, and there were these stacked stones piled against one of the trunks, not like a cairn hiker's leaf, but messy, uneven, as if someone had been trying to build something and then gave up. The rocks smeared with something dark that could have been mud, but looked too thick, too sticky, and I remember standing there staring at it and feeling this sudden pressure in my ears, like the air itself was pressing down on me, and the silence grew heavier, so heavy that I could hear my own pulse thudding against my eardrums. That was when I heard it, the first sound that wasn't me. This faint dragging noise somewhere up ahead, like something heavy being pulled along the rocks, slow, deliberate, and it froze me in place because it wasn't an animal sound. It wasn't leaves or wind. It was weight against stone, and I just stood there gripping the straps of my backpack, waiting, holding my breath until it stopped. I told myself I was imagining it, that the sound carried weird in the mountains, but when I turned to head back down the trail, I realized I couldn't see the opening of the path anymore. The rhododendron tunnels had shifted, branches twisted in ways I didn't remember, and the fading light made everything blur together. So I wasn't even sure which direction I had come from, and my stomach dropped, because I knew this trail was short, just a mile and a half. There was no way I should feel lost already. I decided to keep moving forward, hoping I would loop around, but every step felt wrong. The stones underfoot didn't match what I had seen on the hike up. The air grew colder, and that dragging sound came again, closer this time, scraping against the rocks like someone testing the weight of a body against the ground, and I could feel the vibrations through my boots, as if the trail itself was carrying it toward me. I don't know how long I stood there in that fading light, heart pounding, too afraid to call out, too afraid to move. But when I finally forced myself to keep walking, I caught a glimpse of something between the branches, a shape, tall and thin, swaying slightly as if it was hanging from the air itself, and the smell of rot hit me so hard I gagged into my sleeve, eyes watering before I stumbled forward blindly, just desperate to get away from it. That was when I realized the trail had split. two paths where there should only have been one, both curling into the dark under the tunnels, and the stacked stones were there again, in both directions, like they had been copied and pasted into the world around me. And I knew then that I was not on the map anymore, not on any version of Craggy Gardens Trail that hikers wrote about online. I was somewhere else entirely, and the dragging was behind me, slow, steady, patient. So I picked a path at random, praying it would take me back to my car. But with every step I felt the forest closing in tighter, the light bleeding away faster than it should, and that shape behind the branches never stopped swaying, never stopped watching. And that was only the beginning. So when I tell you, I chose that left path at the split, I don't know why I did. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was just random desperation. But the second my boots hit the first rocks of that trail, I felt like the forest noticed me. In a way, it hadn't before, like it was holding its breath around me and letting me pass through on sufferance. And I knew deep down I had made some kind of choice that mattered. The air on that path was different, sharper, colder, like I had walked through an invisible wall and crossed into a place where the seasons didn't line up anymore. The leaves weren't just red and orange here. They were brittle gray, curling at the edges, like paper ready to crumble into ash. And every time I brushed against one, it disintegrated into dust that clung to my jacket and skin. Like soot, the dragging sound behind me had gone quiet. But that didn't make me feel safer. It just made it worse, because silence in a forest is never natural. Not complete silence, not like that. And I swear the trees themselves were listening to me. My breathing too loud, my heartbeat echoing back in my ears, every step crunching down, like I was sending a signal to something that was waiting. The path wound uphill sharper than it should have, and I started sweating under my jacket. Even though the air was cold, the rocks were slick, and I slipped more than once, scraping my palms, and I could taste the metallic tang of blood when I sucked the sting from my hand. Only it didn't taste quite right. It was bitter, more like rust than blood, and my stomach rolled, but I kept climbing because going back down felt impossible. About 20 minutes in, I saw it again. The stacked stones, only this time they were arranged into a crude arch across the trail like a doorway, low enough that I would have to duck to pass through, and smeared across the top stone was that same dark substance, thicker now, congealed into drips that hung like frozen icicles. And the smell rolling off it was undeniable. Not just rot, but death old and heavy like a slaughterhouse left to fester in the sun. I thought about turning back right then, but behind me the path didn't look the same anymore. It had shifted, the branches curling together tighter, the rocks rearranged in ways that didn't make sense. And when I blinked, I swore I saw movement in the gaps between the trunks. Something long and angular stepping just out of sight. And I knew that if I stood there too long, it would step closer. So I ducked under the stone arch, and the second I did, the The air pressed down harder in my ears, like I was sinking underwater. Everything muffled but my own heartbeat thudding like a drum. And for a moment I felt lightheaded, like I might pass out, but then it lifted, and I was standing on a different stretch of trail that I swear hadn't been there before. The trees opened wider here, their trunks pale and smooth like bone, not bark, and the ground was littered with the scraps of cloth, torn and weathered, like hikers' backs or jackets shredded and half buried in the dirt. And I crouched to touch one, and when I lifted it I realized it was a baseball cap, sun-bleached and cracked at the brim, and inside was a set of initials written in Sharpie JB, but the letters looked smudged as if they had been half erased by damp fingers. I dropped it fast, my hand shaking because it felt wrong to touch it, like I was disturbing something I shouldn't. And when I looked up, I realized the dragging sound was back, only not behind me anymore. It was ahead of me, faint but steady, like something was leading me deeper and daring me to follow. And I hated myself for it, but my feet kept moving because I couldn't bear the thought of standing still and waiting for it to come to me. The farther I went, the more I noticed carvings in the trees, crude lines cut deep into the pale bark spirals, and stick figures in shapes I didn't recognize. And they all seemed to point inward toward the center of the path, like everything was drawing me forward. And when I ran my fingers over one, the bark was warm. Two, warm like flesh, not wood. And I yanked my hand back, but I could still feel the heat in my skin. By now, the light was almost gone, and I pulled out my phone for a flashlight, but the screen glitched the moment I turned it on. The battery had been at 70% before I left the car, but now it showed 2%, and the flashlight flickered dim, then bright, then dim again, and when I raised it toward the trees, the beam caught something tall, moving between the trunks, the shape too thin, too long, its arms bending the wrong way, and I swear I saw its head turn toward me, even though it had no face. Just this smooth, blank surface like stretched skin. I stumbled backward, tripping on a root, and the light cut out completely. My phone dead in my hand, and in that instant of darkness, I heard it the dragging louder than ever. Not one sound, but many, like dozens of limbs being pulled across stone, in unison, surrounding me, circling me, and I dropped to my knees, covering my ears. But it didn't matter. The vibrations shook through the ground, rattling my bones and teeth, until I thought they would crack. When it stopped, the silence that followed was even worse because I realized something was breathing with me, not in sync, but opposite. When I inhaled it, exhaled, and when I exhaled it, inhaled, and the air in my lungs felt stolen, like it didn't belong to me anymore. And I scrambled up, desperate to run, but the trail was different again, split into 3 directions this time, each one lined with those stone stacks, glowing faintly in the dark, like coals buried in ash. I picked the middle one without thinking, sprinting blind, my boots sliding on loose gravel, the branches tearing at my arms and face. And I didn't stop until the smell hit me again. That rancid mix of meat and rot, and something sweet underneath, like flowers left in water too long. And I gagged hard, but kept moving until I burst into another clearing. In the middle of it was a fire pit, cold and filled with ash. But scattered around it were things that made my stomach twist. Camping gear torn, sleeping bags, shredded food wrappers, molded with age, and worst of all, bones. Small and large, some cracked open, some gnawed clean, arranged in messy circles around the pit. And at the very center stood another arch of stacked stones, this one taller and more deliberate, like a gate waiting to be opened. The dragging sound was behind me, again closer than ever, and I could feel the ground vibrating under my boots, like something massive was moving just under the soil. And I realized I had no choice. The only way forward was through that arch. So I tightened my pack straps and stepped inside. The second I crossed it, the world shifted, the clearing gone, the fire pit gone, and I was standing on another trail under a sky that wasn't the right color. A deep, bruised red fading into black, with no stars. And the trees here were taller than any I had ever seen, their trunks rising like pillars into the void above, and the path stretching on forever in both directions. And I knew then I wasn't in North Carolina anymore. I wasn't anywhere that belonged to me. And somewhere behind me in that endless red dark, something exhaled in satisfaction, as if it had been waiting for me all along. So standing on that path under that blood-red sky, I felt my chest tighten in a way I can't even describe, like my ribs were bending inward, like the air itself was too heavy to breathe, and every instinct in me screamed to turn back through the arch. But when I looked over my shoulder, it wasn't there anymore. Just more of the same trail stretching into that endless forest of bone-colored trunks, fading into black. And I knew, without question, that I had been pulled somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. I told myself to stay calm, to keep moving one step at a time, like I was still just hiking on a trail in North Carolina, and not trapped in some nightmare version of it. But even as I thought that, I realized the sounds were wrong. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of this low hum, like a swarm of insects buried miles underground, vibrating up through the roots of the trees and into my legs with every step. And if I stopped walking, it grew louder, like the forest was reminding me to keep going. The ground here wasn't normal dirt either. It was soft and spongy, like walking on soaked moss, but darker and slicker, and when I knelt down to touch it, my fingers came up stained black and sticky like tar. and it clung to my skin even when I wiped it against my jeans, leaving streaks that smelled faintly sweet and metallic at the same time. And I hated myself for noticing, but it reminded me of the smell of blood when it first hits air. The trail wound in a way that felt unnatural, too straight then, too sharp, curving back on itself, only to stretch straight again. And I started marking trees with the blade of my pocket knife, just to be sure. But after maybe half an hour, I saw the same carved initials on a trunk. As before, JB, smudged like fingers had rubbed it away, and my stomach dropped because I had carved nothing like that myself. And yet, here it was again, repeating as if the forest was recycling its own memories. I thought about calling out, but my throat locked up tight. The air tasted too thick, like smoke, and I knew in my gut that if I let my voice loose, something would answer. And I didn't want that. So I just kept moving, and the deeper I went, the more I noticed the trees were wrong. Their branches didn't split in normal ways. They curled back downward, sometimes knitting together overhead like cages, and sometimes spiraling into shapes that looked too deliberate, like symbols written in wood. Then I heard it faint at first, but rising quick, the sound of voices far off down the trail. Not clear words, but murmurs overlapping, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, carried on that low hum of the forest, and my skin crawled, because there was no way people were here. Not in this place. But the voices grew sharper, almost chanting. Not in English, not in anything I could understand, but the rhythm of it worked its way into my head, syncing with my heartbeat until I realized I was walking in time, with it, without meaning to. The chanting stopped all at once, and the silence that followed felt like a trap so thick it pressed into my ears. And that was when I saw light ahead, a pale flicker between the trunks like firelight, and I should have turned around. But the thought of turning back into that silence was worse, so I kept going, and soon I stepped into another clearing. The center was a circle of stones, black and jagged, arranged perfectly, and inside that circle burned a fire, but it didn't look like any fire I'd seen before. The flames were white and blue, flickering without heat, yet I could feel it searing into me, not my skin, but deeper into the marrow of my bones. And surrounding that fire were figures, dozens of them, standing perfectly still, their bodies too tall, their limbs too long, draped in shredded fabric that fluttered without wind, and none of them had faces, just smooth blank skin where their features should be. I froze at the edge of the clearing, and one of the figures turned its head toward me, not moving its body, just twisting that blank face around too far, too smoothly. And then all of them turned one after another, like a ripple through the group. And I swear, the hum of the forest grew louder inside my skull. pressing into my thoughts until I felt like they were pulling words out of me, words I didn't know how to speak. My knees buckled and I dropped to the ground, clutching my head, and the chanting started again. Only this time it was inside me, not around me. My lips moving on their own, forming sounds I had never learned, and I could feel hot blood running from my nose down my chin, dripping onto the black soil. And when I looked up, the figures had begun to move, swaying side to side, their arms rising like branches in a storm. And I knew they were calling something, not just me, something bigger, something that lived in the roots of this place. The fire flared higher, blinding white, and in its center a shape began to rise. Not solid, not smoke, but something in between, massive, twisting, with too many limbs stretching outward, like roots searching for ground. And I couldn't look at it without my stomach heaving, the world tilting sideways, and I crawled backward, desperate to get away. But my hands sank into the soil deeper than they should, like it was swallowing me, pulling me toward the circle. I screamed, though I don't even know if the sound came out, because all I could hear was that chant inside my skull. And as the thing in the fire rose higher, blotting out the red sky, I caught sight of its face, if you can call it, that a pale oval stretched wide like the faceless figures, but split down the middle by a single vertical mouth, lined with teeth too small and too many grinding against each other like stone on stone. And when it opened wider, the sound that came out wasn't noise. It was silence, absolute silence, so deep it crushed everything else away. The figures fell to their knees in unison, and I felt my own body folding down with them against my will. And for a moment I thought this was it, that I had been dragged here just to kneel before whatever this thing was. But then something shifted, a crack in the rhythm, a break in the chant, and I realized one of the figures wasn't kneeling. It stood across the circle, its blank face turned toward me. And though it looked the same as the others, I felt something different in it. Not reverence, not worship, but focus, like it was studying me specifically. And when the silence pressed down hardest, that figure tilted its head slowly and raised one hand pointing at me, and the mouth of the thing in the fire closed with a snap, like a trap. The chanting stopped, the figures froze, and the white flames guttered low, plunging the clearing into a dim, gray glow. And in that pause I felt something brush the back of my mind, like fingers trailing across my thoughts, and a word formed inside me, not spoken, but carved there, run. I didn't wait. I scrambled to my feet, blood dripping from my face. My vision blurred and I bolted into the trees, away from the fire, away from the figures, my boots sinking into the black soil. But I forced myself forward, branches tearing at me, roots grabbing my ankles. And all the while behind me, The chant rose again, furious, this time louder and closer, and I knew they were coming. The forest warped around me, trees shifting places, roots twisting upward, and every time I thought I was gaining distance, I would stumble into the same carvings. On the bark spirals, stick figures, initials JB over and over, repeating like the forest was looping me back on itself. But I kept running, lungs burning, throat raw, until I tripped hard over something half buried in the soil. I landed face first in the dirt, and when I pushed myself up, I realized what I had fallen over. It was a backpack half rotted, the fabric torn open and inside scattered bones. Small, delicate bones that looked human, too small to be an adult. And my stomach lurched, bile burning my throat. But then I saw something else tucked in the side pocket, a wallet swollen with damp. And when I pried it open, I saw an ID card smeared with mud, but the name was still legible. Jason Bradley initials. JBI dropped it like it burned me, 'cause I remembered the hat earlier. The same initials carved in bark, repeating everywhere, and the thought slammed into me hard that maybe he hadn't left these marks willingly. Maybe the forest had taken his name, his identity, and was using it like a brand. And if that was true, then what was it doing to me? I didn't have time to think. The dragging sound was back louder than ever right behind me, like dozens of limbs scraping stone. And when I turned my lightless phone in reflex, the dead screen reflected something moving, just inches away, long arms bending around the trees, blank face almost close enough to touch, and I bolted again. No thought, no direction, just pure animal panic. The ground sloped downward suddenly, and I lost my footing, tumbling, sliding down a bank of wet black soil until I crashed into another clearing. This one smaller, ringed with stones, but empty, no fire, no figures, just a single arch of rocks, like the ones before, standing crooked at the far end, glowing faintly in the dark. And I didn't care if it was a trap. I ran straight for it because anything was better than the thing behind me. I stumbled through and the air shifted again. Heavy pressure on my ears like diving underwater. And when I opened my eyes, I was standing on a trail that looked almost normal. Leaves orange and red under a dark sky. Stars faint above, and for a moment, I thought I was back. But the silence told me I wasn't, not yet, because the forest around me was waiting, and somewhere behind the trees, the dragging never stopped. So when I stepped through that stone arch and found myself back on what looked almost like a real trail, I froze there for a long time because I didn't trust it. The leaves crunching under my boots looked right. The trees looked like trees again. Rough bark, not bone, white columns. The sky even had stars, faint but there. But the silence was too thick. It pressed in on me like the world was holding its breath, waiting to see if I believed the trick. Crouched down and ran my fingers over the leaves scattered across the path just to test them, and they felt brittle but too dry, as if they had been dead for years, not fresh like October leaves should have been. And when I picked one up, it crumbled to dust in my hand, staining my skin, the same black soot that had clung to me on the other side. And I knew then that I hadn't made it back. Not really. Maybe I was closer. Maybe I was somewhere in between, but not home. The air smelled different here too. Not the rancid rot from before, but sharp like ozone after a lightning strike. It burned the inside of my nose and made my tongue taste metallic. And I wondered if I was breathing something that wasn't even air, and whether my lungs would give out if I stayed too long. But I didn't have anywhere else to go, so I pulled my jacket tighter and started walking. At first, the trail looked normal enough, winding upward through the trees, the soil firm, the rocks familiar. But after a few minutes, I started seeing things wedged into the branches overhead, scraps of fabric dangling like flags, torn pieces of backpacks, straps frayed ends, of shirts, sleeves, shredded to ribbons, all hanging, silently, swaying, though there was no wind. And every time I craned my head to look closer, I swore I saw something pale slither back out of sight between the leaves as if the branches themselves were alive. The path twisted again, and I stumbled into another clearing, this one small, maybe 20 feet across, and at the center was a wooden signpost, leaning crooked, the wood gray with age, and splintering and carved into the surface were dozens of names, initials scratched deep, some overlapping others like people had been desperate to leave their marks. I ran my fingers across one and felt a chill as I traced the letters. JP again, carved bigger, this time darker, as if whoever had made it had pressed harder, desperate to be remembered, and I knew it had to be the same Jason Bradley. The forest repeating him again and again, like a stuck record. I wanted to turn away, but my eyes caught something at the bottom of the post, a carving fresh and shallow. My own initials, not mine exactly, but close enough. The first letter right, the second wrong, like the forest had started etching me into its wood before it had the full name, and my stomach lurched. I backed away fast, wiping my hands on my jeans, like I could erase the touch. That was when I heard it faint, but clear this time. Not the dragging, not the chanting, but footsteps behind me, boots on gravel, steady measured, like someone was following just far enough to stay out of sight, and I spun around, shining my dead phone screen like it could help. But there was nothing, only the path stretching back into darkness, and that silence, pressing heavier and heavier until I wanted to scream, just to break it. I forced myself forward faster now, practically jogging, tripping on roots, stumbling on rocks, every nerve screaming at me to keep moving, and the footsteps followed always the same pace, never closer, never farther, just steady, like they knew I couldn't outrun them, like they had all the time in the world. Eventually, the trail sloped downward, and I nearly cried when I saw another parking lot. Through the trees, asphalt cracked, but real, faint glimmer of white lines painted on the ground. And for one breath I thought, maybe I was free, maybe I had found my way back. But when I stepped into the open space, my heart stopped cold. The lot was filled with cars, dozens of them lined, up neat and perfect. But all of them old, rusted, broken glass, scattered across the pavement like they had been here for decades. No engines, no plates, just husks of vehicles, and among them, scraps of belongings, backpacks, boots, a child's car seat, cracked and empty, and on the far side, half buried in weeds, was that same blue sedan I had seen when I first arrived at Craggy Gardens, the condensation still clinging to the glass, like someone had been inside only minutes ago. I walked between the cars, slowly hard-hammering, peering into each one, and every interior was the same, shredded, torn, stained with black streaks that looked too much like dried blood. And though the seats were empty, I kept thinking I saw movement in the mirrors, flickers of pale shapes crouched in the back seats, waiting just out of sight. And the longer I looked, the more certain I became that if I opened a door, something would reach out. I stumbled toward the far end, desperate to get away, and that was when I saw the Trailhead sign again. The same weathered wood, same faded letters, Craggy Gardens Trail carved across it. But the sign was wrong. It was taller, wider. The wood warped like it had been growing, and the words were shifting subtly, letters bending, curling, until they no longer looked like English at all, but symbols jagged and sharp that hurt my eyes to read. And when I blinked, they flickered back to normal like the forest was mocking me. The footsteps came again behind me, louder now, closer, and I broke into a run, darting past the sign, back into the trees, desperate to escape the lot and the endless rows of dead cars. And soon the sound of dragging returned, layered over the footsteps, the two rhythms twining together, one slow, one steady, closing in from both sides. I burst into another clearing, this one smaller, ringed with stone stacks like always, but different this time, because each stack had something resting on top, a personal item, a hat, a shoe, a torn photograph edges, burned, and though I told myself not to look, I couldn't stop my eyes from scanning them and recognizing more initials carved into the stones. JB over and over mixed with others, scratched shallow like the forest, was cataloging its trophies. My stomach twisted and I dropped to my knees, heaving bile into the dirt. And when I wiped my mouth, I realized my hands were black, not just from soil, but from something thicker, clinging like tar, and it smeared across my face, burning when it touched my skin, and I scrubbed at it desperate, but it only spread until my vision blurred and my chest heaved, and I thought I might suffocate. But then I heard something new. A voice not chanting, not humming, but speaking clear and sharp, cutting through the silence. A man's voice, low, rough, strained, like he hadn't used it in years. And it said one word, run. I jerked my head up, scanning the trees, and for a heartbeat, I saw him, a man standing at the edge of the clearing, pale, gaunt clothes shredded to rags, his face shadowed, but his eyes burning faint yellow. And though I couldn't be sure, I thought it was Jason Bradley, the initials, the hat, the wallet, all leading here. And before I could call out, he turned and bolted into the woods. Without thinking, I followed, crashing through the branches, stumbling over roots, lungs burning but keeping him in sight, his ragged shape always just ahead, always turning at the last second. So I never saw his face fully, only the outline. But something in me screamed to trust him, and for once the dragging didn't follow. The footsteps didn't echo, only the sound of my own boots pounding the earth. We broke into another clearing and he stopped at the far side, pointing toward another stone arch, taller than the rest, glowing faint red at the edges like embers. And he looked back at me, finally, his face half revealed, skin, gray eyes, hollow mouth opening, but no sound came out, just that same silence that crushed everything else. And then he shoved his arm toward the arch, gesturing, frantic, before he dissolved into the dark, like smoke blown away. I didn't hesitate. I stumbled forward into the arch and the world shifted again. Heavy air pressing into my ears, vision blurring, spinning until I collapsed onto dirt, leaves crunching under me. And when I lifted my head, I saw another trail stretching ahead, this one brighter light filtering through trees. Bird song faint in the distance for the first time in hours, and for one blissful moment, I thought maybe I was finally free. But when I turned around to look behind me, the arch was gone and carved into the nearest tree. Deep, dark, and fresh were the letters of my name, spelled perfectly this time, and dripping like the bark itself was bleeding. And from somewhere deeper down the trail, a chorus of voices whispered in unison, "Welcome back." So standing there, staring at my name carved into that tree, dripping black like sap, I felt my stomach twist so hard I thought I was going to vomit again. Because it wasn't just the fact that the forest knew me now. It was that it had spelled everything, right? No mistakes this time, and it meant the thing had been learning me piece by piece. And now, it had me complete. The bird song I thought I had heard when I first stumbled onto this new trail was gone instantly, like it had only been baited in. Its place was that hum again, low at first, then rising sharp like 1,000 insects buzzing inside the wood of the trees. And I slapped my palms against my ears, but it didn't stop. It was inside me, rattling my teeth like they were tuning forks, and I staggered forward, because staying still meant drowning in it. The trail ahead looked real, but too real, like a photograph of a trail printed too sharp. Every leaf too detailed, every line of bark etched like a carving. And the sky overhead was pale gray with no sun, no clouds, just blank light that never shifted. And I walked under it, feeling like I was trapped in a picture frame with no way to climb out. After a while, I noticed shapes in the dirt along the path. Footprints, dozens maybe, hundreds, all different sizes. Some deep and fresh, others faded like shadows, pressed into the soil, and they all faced forward. None turned back. And when I crouched to touch one, the dirt was warm. Not from the sun, but like body heat, still clinging, as if whoever made it had passed only seconds before. I kept walking faster, heart thudding, and soon the footprints grew stranger. Longer, wider toes, stretched like claws until they didn't look human at all. And the soil around them was scorched, black like coals pressed into the ground. And I told myself not to look behind me, because I knew if I saw the prints shifting into place as I walked, I would lose my mind. The trail sloped downward into a hollow, and at the bottom, I found another clearing, only this one was different. No stones, no fire, no arches, just a cabin leaning crooked against the trees. The wood, dark, rotting roof, sagging, and the windows boarded over. But light flickered faint between the cracks, like something burning inside. And though every instinct screamed at me to stay away, my feet carried me closer, like I was being pulled by a hook buried deep in my chest. When I reached the porch, the boards sagged under my weight, creaking so loud it echoed through the forest. And for the first time I realized I couldn't hear the dragging anymore. No footsteps, no hum. Only the creak of the porch, like the forest itself, was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do. And with my hand shaking, I reached for the door. It opened on its own, swinging inward, slow, the hinges moaning like something alive. And the smell that rolled out hit me hard. Sour, sweet, sharp like meat, burned and rotted at the same time. And I gagged into my sleeve, but stepped inside anyway, because the pull was too strong. The inside was dark, but not empty. The walls covered in carvings, spirals, and stick figures. Names etched over and over, so many initials repeated. The wood looked alive with it, pulsing faint under my flashlight, and at the far side of the room sat a chair, old broken wood, and tied to it with ropes that had fused into the flesh. Was a man, or what had once been a man, His skin was gray and stretched tight. His head slumped forward, his hair patchy and long like moss. And when I stepped closer, his eyes snapped open, glowing faint yellow, and his head jerked up with a crack that echoed through the cabin, and I stumbled backward, hitting the wall hard. His mouth opened and a rasp scraped out dry and broken like paper tearing, and he whispered, "Run." But the word didn't come from his throat. It came from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ropes themselves vibrating in time with the sound. And I realized the forest wasn't letting him speak. It was using him like a puppet. I bolted for the door, but before I reached it, his head snapped sideways, bones crunching as it twisted too far, and he croaked out another word, my name, and hearing it spoken in that voice froze me mid-step, because it wasn't just sound. It was my own thoughts turned against me, echoing from outside my skull. The walls shuddered, then carvings glowing faint red, and the ropes binding. The man tightened, cutting deeper until his skin split, and black tar spilled out running across the floor toward my boots, and I tore out of the cabin, tripping down the steps and crashing onto the dirt outside, heart-hammering throat, raw from screams I don't even remember making. The forest had changed again, the trail gone, the trees crowding in closer trunks, bent and leaning, like they were listening, and between them I saw faces, dozens of them, pale blank, stretched across the bark eyes, hollow mouths, wide and silent, and everyone turned toward me in unison, as if they had been waiting for me to step outside. I staggered forward, weaving through them, trying not to touch the trunks, but the faces followed me, their mouths moving soundless, and I realized they were speaking anyway, inside my skull, all at once, overlapping, whispering my name again and again until I wanted to tear my ears off, just to make it stop. And the farther I went, the louder they grew, until I thought my head would split. Finally, I stumbled into another clearing, this one larger, ringed with standing stones, taller than me, black and jagged, glowing faint with that ember red, and in the center was another arch. But this one wasn't stone, it was wood tree limbs, twisted together, bleeding sap that dripped onto the soil like blood, and the smell rolling off it was sharp, sweet metallic, like the air inside the cabin. And I knew without doubt that whatever waited on the other side was worse than anything I had seen. Yet the voices in the trees rose higher, screaming inside me, telling me to go through, and my legs moved without me stepping closer, inch by inch, my hands trembling. But then I remembered Jason Bradley, the figure who had pointed me toward an arch before, who had maybe saved me, and I dropped to my knees, digging into my back, ripping through the contents until I found the wallet I had picked up in the soil. his ID card smeared but legible, and I held it tight, like a charm, pressing it against my chest. The voices faltered just a beat. The hum stuttered like static skipping on a record, and I took that moment to shove myself backward, away from the arch, falling onto my back and scrambling on all fours, desperate to get distance. And the air around me shifted heavier. The faces in the trees, twisting mouths, opening wide until they split the bark in jagged cracks, screaming louder inside me. But I kept crawling, dragging myself across the soil until the clearing blurred into another trail. This one narrower, darker. The air damp with the smell of rot, sharp and immediate. And though every nerve screamed to turn back, I kept going, because behind me, the wood arch pulsed faint red, like a heartbeat, and I knew if I stayed, it would open whether I wanted it to or not. The trail stretched on forever, my body shaking my chest tight, but I forced myself to keep walking, and eventually I stumbled into another signpost, leaning against a tree carved with names, initials and fresh at the bottom. Again, was mine deeper this time, complete dripping dark, like before, and below it, a new word, carved shaky and rough. Help. Reached out to trace it, hand trembling, and when my fingers touched the bark, the hum cut out the silence complete. And in that silence I heard something else, faint breathing. Not mine, not the forest. Something close, just behind my shoulder, and I turned slow, every muscle screaming, and saw it. A figure tall, pale too, thin arms bent wrong, standing inches away, face blank skin, stretched smooth, no eyes, no mouth, but the sound of breathing came from it, steady, deliberate, filling the silence, and when I stumbled back, it stepped forward in perfect time with me, like a mirror, and I realized the footprints in the soil had been leading here all along, not from other people, but from it following step for step, until it finally caught me, and when it tilted its head down to me close enough that I felt the air shift, its blank face split open down the middle, revealing that vertical mouth teeth, grinding stone on stone, and the whisper that came out was my own voice saying, "Run again." Only this time it wasn't a warning, it was a command. So when that thing split its face down the middle and spoke in my voice telling me to run, I should have frozen. I should have curled up and let whatever was coming swallow me whole, but instead my body obeyed before my brain even caught up my legs, jolting like strings had been yanked, and I bolted down the trail, my boots sliding on the damp black soil, my lungs straining like I had been sprinting for miles already. The trees blurred past me, their trunks bending inward overhead, like ribs caging me in. And every time I glanced sideways, I swore I saw faces in the bark, turning to watch mouths splitting open in silent screams, their eyes black knots that seemed to follow my movement. And the more I looked, the more I realized they weren't just watching. They were leaning, shifting subtly inward, trying to close the trail behind me. The sound followed too, not dragging, not chanting, not even the hum, just the echo of my own footsteps, doubled, tripled, multiplied, until it felt like hundreds of me were running in unison, a whole crowd of selves racing behind me, and when I risked a glance back, my stomach dropped, because the trail was filled wall to wall with pale figures all shaped like me, same height, same build, same jerky movements, their faces smooth, blank, except for that vertical split mouth, and they were all chasing me. I ran harder, my chest burning, vision tunneling, sweat stinging my eyes, but the trail didn't end. It just kept winding through identical trees, identical roots, the same carvings, spirals, initials. JB scratched into the bark every 10 feet, like I was sprinting in place around some monstrous loop, and my panic turned raw as I realized no matter how hard I ran, I wasn't getting anywhere. That was when the forest shifted again, the ground sloping downward, sharp without warning, and I lost my footing, sliding on my back rocks, cutting into me branches, tearing at my arms and legs, until I crashed into another clearing, sprawling in the dirt, gasping for air. And when I pushed myself up, I realized the crowd of doubles had stopped at the edge, not crossing into the open, just standing still, swaying side to side like grass in the wind, blank faces all tilted down at me, mouths grinding teeth in rhythm with each other. At the center of this clearing was a pit, shallow but wide, maybe 20 feet across, and inside it lay bones stacked haphazard, long and short, shattered and cracked, some still streaked dark, with dried rot, and scattered among them were scraps of clothes, boots, backpacks, all of it damp and sinking into the black soil, and in the middle of that pile stood another figure. It looked human at first, smaller, shorter than the rest, but when I stepped closer I realized it was a boy, maybe 10, maybe 12, dressed in tattered jeans and a hoodie, the fabric soaked through and clinging to his thin frame, and he was staring at me with eyes too bright, too yellow, glowing faint under the gray light, and my chest went cold, because even though I had never seen him before, I knew who he was. Jason Bradley. The initials carved everywhere, the hat, the wallet, the ID, all of it had been pointing to him. And here he was, staring at me from the center of a pit of bones like he had been, waiting. And when his mouth opened, the voice that came out was not a child's voice, not even human. Deep, resonant, vibrating through the soil and into my bones. And it said again, "Run." But this time, it wasn't a command, not like the faceless thing. Before, it was bleeding, desperate, cracked at the edges, like he was warning me against himself, and I took a step backward, but the doubles at the edge of the clearing shuffled forward in unison, closing the circle around me, and I realized there was nowhere left to run. The boy raised his arms, slow jerky like a puppet, and the bones in the pit shifted rattling, as if pulled by invisible strings, rising and clattering together, forming shapes, wrong shapes, piles of ribs and skulls fusing into towers, limbs knitting into spindly structures that twitched and swayed, and as the piles grew taller, the doubles around the clearing swayed with them, their mouths grinding louder, louder, until the sound drowned everything else. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head, trying to shut it out, but then the boy's voice boomed again inside me, tearing through the sound, and it said, "Not run this time, but stay." And I looked up and saw his eyes blazing brighter, burning yellow until they were the only light in the clearing, and I understood he wasn't trying to warn me away. He was trying to pin me down, to trap me here with him, forever. Panic ripped through me raw and wild, and I scrambled to my feet, bolting toward the only gap in the circle, a narrow space between two of the doubles, and when I lunged for it, their arms shot out long and thin, like branches snapping around my shoulders, pulling me back into the pit. But adrenaline surged, and I twisted hard, breaking free, ripping the skin on my arms as I tore loose and stumbled into the trees. The trail here was narrower, darker, choked with roots, and I ran blind branches clawing at my face. The sound of grinding teeth and rattling bones echoing behind me, but slowly fading, as if the forest itself was letting me go. And when I finally collapsed against a trunk, gasping my throat raw, I realized the silence had returned, heavy, suffocating, and I was alone again. I wiped blood and dirt from my face, my hands shaking so bad I could barely grip my pack, and when I fumbled it open to grab my water bottle, it wasn't there. Instead, stuffed inside was the baseball cap with the initials JB, and tucked in the brim was a scrap of paper folded small, stained black, and when I opened it, there were only 2 words scratched rough into the surface. "Help me." My chest clenched hard, because I knew then that Jason Bradley wasn't gone. Not fully. At least, he was still in there somewhere, twisted, trapped, but reaching out, and for one flicker of a moment, I thought maybe I could actually save him. Maybe that was why the forest had dragged me here in the first place. Not just to consume me, but to use me. The thought didn't last long, because as I stood clutching that paper, the ground under me trembled, faint at first, then harder, shaking the roots, rattling the leaves overhead, falling like ash. And from deep below came that dragging sound again, but multiplied, amplified, until it felt like the entire earth was shifting. And I realized something bigger than the figures, bigger even than the boy, was waking up beneath me. The soil split open a jagged crack, tearing across the trail, and I stumbled back as the earth yawned wide, and from the darkness below rose a shape massive, twisting too many limbs, clawing for purchase. Blank faces stretched across its surface, dozens, maybe hundreds, each one splitting open with vertical mouths, grinding teeth in unison. And I understood then that the faceless figures weren't separate at all. They were fragments, splinters of this thing, the forest itself, given shape. I ran again. No thought, no plan, just raw instinct, bolting down the trail as the crack widened behind me, swallowing trees, roots snapping like bones, the hum rising into a deafening roar that shook the sky. And as I stumbled forward, I caught sight of another arch ahead, tall, wide, glowing faint white, not red, not black, but white like bone. And for the first time I thought, maybe this one was different. I sprinted for it, the ground splitting at my heels, the roar growing louder until it was inside my skull. And as I lunged through the arch, the air pressed down heavy, crushing my chest, my vision tunneling. And when I opened my eyes, I was lying face down on gravel. I pushed myself up slowly, heart hammering, ears ringing. And when I lifted my head, I almost cried, because I was staring at pavement, cracked, painted with faint white lines. The parking lot at Craggy Gardens Trailhead, and my car sitting there exactly where I had left it, but the lot wasn't empty. Every space was filled with cars, old, rusted, abandoned, lined up perfect, and every windshield was fogged with condensation, like someone had just been inside breathing. And when I looked closer, I saw faces pale and blank staring from the back seats, dozens of them, mouths splitting open, grinding teeth in rhythm with each other, and the hum rising again inside me, louder than ever, and carved deep into the hood of my own car were 3 words scratched raw into the paint: welcome home. So standing there staring at my own car, with those words carved deep into the hood, and those pale blank faces watching from the other vehicles, I felt something collapse inside me like a floor giving way, because there was no relief in being back at the trailhead. No safety, no end to it. I was still inside the loop, just closer to the edge. My first instinct was to run straight to my car, throw myself inside and lock the doors. But when I took a step forward, the faces inside the other vehicles all turned in unison. Eyes, blank sockets, glistening mouths, bleeding vertical. And the grinding started again, louder, sharper, like stone cracking against a stone. And I froze mid-step, because every bone in my body screamed that if I broke the symmetry, if I moved too fast, they would all pour out at once and drag me back into the woods. So I forced myself to move, slow, deliberate, like I was walking on glass each step, measured until I reached the driver's side door, and even though my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key out of my pocket, I slid it into the lock and turned it, the click of the mechanism echoing too loud across the lot. The faces twitched at the sound, heads jerking slightly, mouths grinding faster, but they didn't move, and I slipped into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut behind me, pressing the locks down hard, my chest heaving as I shoved the key into the ignition and twisted. The engine roared to life, thank God, and for a flicker of a moment, I thought maybe I could just drive out like nothing had happened. But then the dashboard lights flickered, sputtering, before settling, and I noticed the gas gauge was buried on empty, the needle vibrating faintly against the bottom, and my blood ran cold because I knew without doubt that I had filled the tank before driving up here. I remembered standing at the pump watching the numbers climb, but now it was dry, completely drained, like something had siphoned it all out. While I was trapped in the forest, I slammed the wheel with my palms, cursing, my voice cracking. But the engine still rumbled, so I threw it into reverse anyway, the tires crunching on gravel, and I backed up hard, weaving between the parked cars, their windshields fogging heavier, the faces inside pressed close to the glass, watching me with mouths moving, grinding in rhythm. And as I shifted into drive and floored the pedal, I expected to shoot forward onto the road, but instead, the car lurched, then shuddered, then slammed to a stop, even though the wheels spun wild. I glanced down, thinking maybe the transmission had blown, but the gear was fine, the pedal hard against the floor, the engine screaming, and when I looked up, my stomach dropped, because the road ahead was gone, completely gone, replaced with black soil stretching into the trees, as if the pavement had never existed. The painted lines cut short against the dirt, and the tree line already bending inward, closing off the way. Panic boiled over raw and desperate, and I yanked the wheel hard, swinging the car around to face the other end of the lot. But it was the same there too. No road, no exit, just soil and trees crowding closer. Every second, their trunks bending their roots, spreading like fingers searching for purchase, and the cars lining the lot trembled faintly, shaking as if something inside was pressing against the doors. Harder, harder, like the glass was about to break. I didn't think, I just acted, throwing the door open and bolting into the open lot, sprinting between the rows of cars, my boots slipping on the gravel, my lungs tearing, but I didn't stop, 'cause behind me I heard the first windshield crack, a sharp splintering sound, followed by another and another, until it was a chorus echoing across the clearing, and when I risked a glance back, I saw the glass shatter inward, pale arms writhing out, faceless figures dragging themselves through the frames, one after another, spilling onto the gravel and turning their blank faces toward me. I sprinted toward the far tree line, because anywhere had to be better than waiting for them. And when I crashed through the brush, I found another trail, narrow, choked with roots, but real enough, and I stumbled onto it, legs burning, pushing deeper until the parking lot sounds faded behind me, swallowed by the trees and replaced with silence heavy and crushing. The trail wound upward, steep and rocky, my legs shaking as I climbed my flashlight beam, jerking across the trunks, and every few feet I saw carvings again, initials, spirals, stick figures, and every time my own name, deeper, cleaner, more deliberate, like the forest was rewriting me one letter at a time until I belonged to it completely, and I hated myself for touching them, but I couldn't stop my fingers, dragging across the grooves, feeling the wood warm, alive. After what felt like hours, I reached another clearing, small, this time ringed by stones, stacked carefully into short towers, balanced in impossible ways, and in the middle stood something new, a mirror full-length frame, old wood warped, but the glass perfect spotless, even under the gray sky, and I knew without doubt that it was waiting for me. I stepped closer, drawn in, despite every instinct screaming, and when I looked into it, my reflection stared back, gaunt, pale eyes, sunken, but it wasn't moving right, the timing off a fraction, the blink, a beat, too slow, the breathing not matching my chest. And as I leaned closer, its mouth split open vertically, teeth grinding stone on stone, and my knees almost buckled as the sound vibrated inside my skull. The reflection raised its hand and pressed it against the glass, palm flat, and I felt heat radiating from the surface, searing even before I touched it, and against every shred of reason. I lifted my own hand and pressed back, and the second my skin met the glass, it wasn't glass anymore. It was flesh, slick and warm, fingers curling around mine, pulling hard, yanking me forward until my chest did the frame, and I realized it was trying to drag me through into whatever was waiting on the other side. I tore backward, stumbling, falling into the dirt, scrambling away on all fours, and the reflection slammed its fists against the inside of the mirror, shattering cracks spreading across the glass, but not breaking through. And with every strike the sound was louder, sharper, until my ears rang and blood trickled warm from my nose, and I clutched my head, screaming for it to stop. And then it did the reflection, lowering its hands, tilting its head in perfect mirror of me, its mouth still open, teeth grinding, and it whispered my name clear and sharp inside my head. And I knew then that the forest didn't just want me inside it. It wanted me to become it, to give up whatever made me separate and join the endless faceless crowd, carved into bark and bound into mirrors and buried in pits of bones. I staggered up, swaying dizzy blood, still dripping, and I ran again, away from the clearing, away from the mirror, deeper into the trail, my body moving on autopilot, driven by raw fear, and somewhere far behind me, I heard the sound of glass shattering, finally giving way, and I didn't dare look back. The trail sloped downward again, narrowing, twisting, and I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing against a tree, gasping, shaking, but alive. And when I lifted my head, I saw a faint light ahead through the trees, softer, warmer, golden like firelight. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of hope. I forced myself forward, crawling at first, then stumbling on unsteady legs, until I broke into another clearing, smaller, ringed by stones, and in the center, a fire burned, tall, bright, real, crackling flames, licking at the gray sky, and beside it sat a figure, hunched over in a dark jacket hat, pulled low, face hidden, and when they looked up I froze, because I recognized the outline, the height, the tilt of the head. It was Jason Bradley, or what was left of him. He smiled, faint, sharp teeth glinting in the firelight, and his eyes burned yellow, too bright, too inhuman, and he raised a hand, slow, deliberate, beckoning me closer, and though my legs screamed to run, my body moved anyway, dragging me step by step into the glow. So I stood there, trembling on the edge of that clearing, watching Jason Bradley sit by the fire, his head tilted just enough that the brim of his cap threw his eyes into shadow. But I didn't need light to know what burned underneath, because I had already seen it. Those yellow flames glowing too bright and human, and still his smile looked almost kind, like he was relieved to see me, and that kindness twisted my gut. Worse than any of the faceless things had he beckoned again, slow, careful, his fingers crooking like tree branches bending toward me, and I wanted to scream at myself to stop, to turn around and bolt back into the trees. But my body wouldn't listen, my boots dragging through the dirt step by step until I was close enough to feel the heat from the flames licking at my skin, and to smell the smoke, sharp and acrid, mixed with something sweet and rotten. Underneath, Jason patted the ground beside him, and his voice came low, calm, steady, but too deep, too resonant for a boy, his size, and it vibrated through my chest as he said, "Sit." And before I could resist, I dropped to my knees, the soil damp, seeping into my jeans, my hands shaking in my lap, and I stared at him, waiting for whatever came next, because I knew this was the moment all of it had been leading toward. He leaned forward, arms on his knees, eyes catching the firelight and glowing brighter now, clearly visible, no longer hidden. And he said softly, like a secret, "You came back, and the way he said it made my heart twist because it was an accusation. It was gratitude relief, like he had been waiting for years just to see me walk into that clearing. And my voice broke raw as I asked, "Who are you?" "Really?" Jason tilted his head, studying me like he was deciding how much to reveal. And then he spoke, not in sentences, not in the way people talk, but in fragments. Heavy words, each one carrying more weight than it should. He said, "Name carved, lost hell, forest, nose, bound trade, never left." And my chest clenched as I pieced it together. He had been taken, trapped, rewritten by this place, turned into something that looked like him, but wasn't entirely human anymore. The fire cracked, loud sparks spitting upward, and Jason's eyes followed them like they meant something, like he was reading them, and he said, again, clearer, "This time you don't leave, not once here, forever, unless..." And he trailed off, his mouth twitching like the word hurt him to speak. And I leaned forward, desperate. "Unless what do I do to get out?" His gaze dropped to the flames, his reflection shivering in the firelight, warped and broken. And finally he said, "Trade one stays, one goes, must choose." And I felt my stomach drop because the truth slid into place, sharp and cruel like a blade. The forest didn't let anyone out on their own. There always had to be a balance, one soul taken in, so another could walk free. I shook my head, my throat tight. No, there's got to be another way. But Jason just looked at me, steady, calm, and said, "I tried, couldn't, broke me, forest. Keeps what it touches." And when he pulled his sleeve up, I saw his arm, the skin gray, veined with black, his veins pulsing faint under the flesh, like roots spreading through soil. And I recoiled back, bile rising in my throat. The fire shifted, then dimming, like something had sucked the oxygen out of the clearing. Shadows stretching longer, sharper across the stones. And Jason leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. "Not mine, yours. Forest wants you." And I felt the ground tilt under me like gravity. Itself had shifted, pulling me toward him, toward the flames, and my body lurched forward, hands clawing into the dirt, trying to hold myself back. But then his hand shot out, clamping around my wrist, burning hot, too strong for a boy that size. And he pulled me closer, eyes blazing brighter. And he said, "Maybe not. Maybe trade. Maybe you give another." And I knew then what he meant. I could offer someone else. Anyone else. Let the forest take them instead of me. And I could walk free. My head spun with the thought, my stomach churning because it was wrong, vile. But even as I tried to reject it, some sick, desperate part of me clung to the idea. Because I wanted to live more than anything. I wanted out. And Jason must have seen that flicker of weakness in my face. Because his smile widened, sharp teeth, glinting in the firelight, and he whispered, "Too soon. Forest waits." The flames roared higher, then so high they almost touched the canopy, the heat pressing down heavy, and I stumbled back, pulling free from his grip, falling onto my hands, gasping, and when I looked up, he was gone, the fire burning steady, but the space where he sat empty, as if he had never been there at all. I staggered to my feet, heart pounding, the choice, echoing in my head over and over, trade or stay, and I stumbled back into the trees blind to where the trail led, just needing to move, needing to breathe. But the forest shifted around me again, the paths twisting until I found myself in another clearing, ringed by faces carved deep into the trunks. Dozens, maybe hundreds, each one more detailed than before. Eyes cut sharp, mouths open in silent screams. And as I moved closer, I realized they weren't just random. They were portraits. Saw men, women, children, all carved in perfect detail. And then my stomach flipped as I recognized one pale, hair-thin face. Hollow eyes, my own, carved exact into the bark. Staring back at me, mouth open wide, and inside the carving I swore I saw movement, lips forming words, though no sound came, and I stumbled back, my hands shaking because the forest wasn't waiting to claim me. It already had my likeness etched permanent into its skin. The silence broke. Then a voice low, deep, resonant, rolling through the trees. Not Jason, not the faceless things. Something older saying, trade. One stays. One goes echoing from every trunk, every face. Their mouths opening wider, splintering the bark, until sap bled down. Like black tar dripping into the soil, and the ground itself shuddered like a heartbeat. I ran again, no thought, just raw panic, crashing through brush, scraping my arms against bark until I burst into another space, smaller, narrower, and there, in the dirt, lay a backpack, torn, filthy, familiar. And when I crouched down, shaking, I saw the stitched initials on the flap, JB, and inside scattered papers, photos, crumpled receipts, all the remnants of a life that had been stripped away and left to rot here. And I understood then that Jason hadn't just been lost. He had been erased piece by piece until nothing was left but what the forest made of him. I clutched one photo, my hands trembling. A picture of a smiling boy standing with his parents. At some overlooked the mountains, behind them wide and endless. And I wanted to weep, because it was proof that he had been real, once human before this place took him and twisted him into something else. And I knew, if I didn't find a way out soon, this would be me too. The soil under me shifted again, vibrating faint, and I looked up to see another arch rising from the trees. This one massive woven from branches dripping sap, glowing faint red the same as before, and beyond it, shadows writhed too many limbs, too many faces, and I knew stepping through meant surrender, becoming part of it forever. But when I turned back, the path had closed, roots weaving together, trunks leaning tight. The only way left forward through that arch, and Jason's words echoed in my head. Choose, soon, forest waits. And I realized my time was running out. So I stood there trembling, staring into that writhing darkness, weighing the impossible choice, and knowing no matter what, I decided I was already half gone, already carved into the bark already, spoken by the trees already owned. So I stood at the edge of that arch, my body trembling, my hands slick with sweat, clutching that crumpled photograph of Jason Bradley. And I knew the forest had cornered me, boxed me in, left me with only one path forward, and still some stubborn animal, part of my brain, screamed not to go through, because whatever writhed beyond those dripping branches would finish what the carvings had already started, and I wasn't ready to let myself be erased. I turned, searching for any crack in the wall of roots, any gap between the trunks that leaned tight together. But the forest had sealed itself, perfect, seamless, like it had been growing toward this moment for centuries. And the silence pressed in heavier with each breath, broken only by the faint sound of teeth grinding stone on stone coming from the arch. And I realized it wasn't silence at all. It was waiting. The photo in my hand shook, and I lifted it closer to the faint glow of my flashlight. Jason's boyish grin frozen in time. His parents smiling proud, and my throat tightened because he had been just a kid when this place took him. A kid with a life ahead of him. And now he was fire-lit eyes and sharpened teeth, whispering trades by a bit of bones. And it struck me sharp that maybe the forest had let me find this photo on purpose, like it was dangling hope or guilt in front of me to sweeten the choice. I shoved the photo into my pocket and forced myself forward, not through the arch, but along its edge close enough to feel the heat of the sap dripping thick down the branches, each drop sizzling in the soil like acid, and the smell sweet metallic sharp coating my throat. But I kept moving, because if there was no escape behind me, then the only hope left was finding something deeper, some flaw in this endless trap. The path bent sharp away from the arch, winding through denser trees, their bark darker, slick with moisture, and every few feet I saw names carved, initials layered over initials, and always mine again and again, deeper each time, like the forest was carving me closer to the core of itself. And I touched one of them against my will, my fingers tracing the groove, and for a second the hum roared back inside me, vibrating every bone, like I had pressed a switch, and I jerked my hand away, stumbling before it settled again into silence. I walked for what felt like hours. No change in the light above. No sun, no moon. Just that blank gray glow that never shifted, and my body dragged heavier with each step until I felt hollow, like the forest had been feeding off my strength with every mile. And when I finally collapsed against a trunk, I heard it faint breathing, close, deliberate, steady, not mine. I turned slow, my flashlight trembling across the underbrush, and there it was again, the faceless figure, pale, too tall, too thin, arms bent wrong, standing just at the edge of the light, its vertical mouth splitting open, teeth grinding slow, steady, and it spoke in my voice again, only softer this time, almost gentle, saying, "Stay," and my chest tightened, because I realized this thing wasn't hunting me. It was shepherding me, keeping me from straying too far off whatever path the forest had chosen. I forced myself up, legs shaking, stumbling backward, deeper into the trail, and it followed at the edge of the light, always there, always, breathing, never rushing, just enough to remind me it would never let me go. And eventually the trees parted into another clearing, smaller, ringed with broken stone, walls, crumbled ruins of something older than the park, older than the trail, and in the center a stone well moss covered cracked its mouth, dark and bottomless. I staggered to the edge, peering down my light, disappearing into endless black, and from below came whispers, faint layered dozens of voices calling my name, over and over, overlapping until it was almost a song, and I leaned too far, dizzy, sick, my stomach churning, because I felt the pull deep inside me like gravity, urging me to tip forward and let myself fall into that darkness and join the chorus. I dropped to my knees, gripping the stones, raw desperation anchoring me, and screamed back at the voices, "What do you want? What do you want from me?" And the whispers shifted all at once, sinking together into one voice, deep, resonant, the same one that had spoken through the trees. Trade, one stays, one goes, and the stones under my hands grew warm, pulsing like a heartbeat, and I jerked back, stumbling away. The faceless figure stood behind me, now closer than ever, its breath, hot damp, filling my lungs. And when I whipped around, it leaned low mouth, opening wider, wider, until it split the length of its chest, revealing rows of grinding teeth. And from inside came Jason's voice, ragged, broken, begging, "Help me," and my knees buckled at the sound, because it wasn't the cruel, twisted whisper I had heard at the fire. It was the voice of a child, raw, desperate, pleading. I reached out without thinking, my hand trembling, hovering inches from that gaping maw. And the second, my skin brushed the air inside. The figure convulsed, jerking backward, its form flickering like static, revealing flashes of a boy's face behind the blank skin. Jason's real face, pale, terrified eyes wet with tears before the forest slammed back over it, blank and grinding, and I fell to the dirt, shaking. The choice was real, that much was clear. If I gave in, if I traded someone else, the forest might release me, and maybe even him. But if I didn't, then both of us were gone, carved into bark, burned into mirrors, swallowed by pits of bone. And as the figure straightened, looming over me, I realized that the forest wasn't going to wait much longer. I ran again, legs screaming, lungs tearing, crashing through the underbrush, until I burst onto another path, wider, straighter, lined with stones. And at the far end, I saw light brighter than fire, brighter than the gray sky, real daylight spilling between the trees, and my chest surged with hope, so sharp it hurt. I sprinted toward it, every muscle burning. But the closer I got, the stranger. It felt the air heavy, thick, the ground trembling underfoot. And when I broke into the clearing, the sight froze me cold. It was the trailhead again. Craggy Gardens parking lot laid out, perfect. Every car line neat, every windshield. Fogged the faces still pressed to the glass mouths grinding. But this time, dozens more, maybe hundreds, filling every vehicle, and the hum rising deafening louder than I had ever heard, shaking the asphalt, cracking it open in jagged lines that spread like veins. And at the center of the lot, where the fire pit had been, in the first clearing stood Jason, his body stretched taller, older, his skin gray, veined with black eyes blazing yellow, his smile sharp, cruel now, and his voice thundered across the lot. You choose now. The cars trembled, glass shattering arms, writhing pale blank figures spilling out onto the asphalt, crawling, dragging themselves closer, teeth grinding in rhythm. And Jason raised his arms wide, like a conductor leading an orchestra, his voice rolling deep through the chaos. One stays, one goes choose, and my body locked frozen, because there was no one here to trade, no one but me. Then I saw movement at the edge of the lot, a figure stumbling out of the trees, disoriented, clutching a pack to his chest. Another hiker. Maybe someone just starting their trail late. A stranger who had no idea what they had walked into. And my stomach lurched, because I understood then that the forest had brought us together on purpose, given me an option, handed me a way out. The crowd of faceless things turned in unison, their blank heads snapping toward the new hiker mouths, splitting vertical grinding louder, and Jason's eyes locked on me, waiting to see what I would do, and my chest felt like it was tearing apart, because here it was, the trade laid bare. I could point to him, offer him up, and maybe walk free, or I could keep running, keep refusing until the forest crushed me, swallowed me whole like it had done to Jason, my throat raw. I screamed at the stranger to run, to get out now, but my voice was drowned by the grinding, the hum, the roar of Jason's laughter echoing across the lot, and the hiker just stood there wide-eyed, frozen as the faceless things crawled closer, their arms reaching mouths, opening wide. And in that moment I knew the forest wasn't asking me anymore. It was forcing me to decide, carving the choice into me, the same way it had carved my name into bark and stone and mirrors. And I realized with sick clarity that no matter what I did, some part of me would never leave this place, because it had already taken root inside me. So there I was, frozen in the middle of that cracked parking lot, the air thick with the grinding roar of 100 faceless mouths. Jason standing at the center, his eyes burning yellow, his arms spread wide like a preacher at the altar, demanding sacrifice, and the stranger at the edge of the trees, clutching his pack, staring at me like I was supposed to explain any of this to him, and my chest felt like it was tearing open, because I knew I was the hinge, I was the fulcrum. Everything came down to my choice. The faceless things crawled closer, pale arms scraping against asphalt, their teeth grinding louder, louder, until it was all I could hear, drowning out my thoughts, and Jason's voice thundered above them. One stays, one goes juice, and I opened my mouth, but nothing came out, only a rasp, dry raw, because there was no right answer, no way out that wasn't soaked in blood. The stranger stumbled forward, eyes wide, darting between the figures spilling from the cars, and me, his face, pale sweat cutting streaks through the dirt on his skin, and he called out, desperate voice cracking, "Hey, what the hell is this? What's happening?" And my throat locked, because what could I even say? How could I tell him the truth that he had just walked into something ancient, hungry, endless, and now the forest had already chosen him as my salvation? I shook my head, screaming at him, "Run, just run." But the forest twisted around the word, choking it down into a whisper, lost under the grinding roar, and the stranger staggered again, tripping, falling hard onto the cracked asphalt, his back skidding away, and the faceless thing surged faster, like sharks scenting blood, their vertical mouths opening wider, and Jason laughed, deep, cruel, shaking the lot, his eyes locked on me, waiting. I thought about Jason as a boy, smiling in that photo, with his parents standing tall at the overlook, a kid with a whole life ahead of him. And I thought about the fire, the pit of bones, the carvings, the mirrors, the way the forest had carved my name over and over until it owned me. And I realized maybe Jason had been in this same place once, forced to choose, forced to give himself up because there was no one else to trade, and the forest had kept him, twisting him into what I saw now. The stranger pushed himself up, staggering toward me, arms outstretched like I was safety, like I could help him. And for one raw second, I wanted to grab him, drag him out of this place. Together, fight our way free. But the moment the thought surfaced, the forest crushed it with that voice, deep, resonant, rolling through the air. One stays, one goes. And I understood there was no we in this story. Only me or him. Jason stepped closer, eyes blazing brighter, his mouth splitting wider, rows of sharp teeth grinding sparks, and he whispered to me, only me, though I heard it inside. My bones, say it, just say his name. Give him, and you walk free. And I felt my lips trembling, my throat straining because it would be so easy, so damn easy to speak to. Offer him up and end this nightmare. The stranger stumbled again, grabbing at my arm, eyes wild, bleeding. Please, man, help me. And his grip was warm, solid, human, real. And in that moment, I saw myself reflected in his face, the same fear, the same desperation, the same hopelessness. And I knew if I gave him up, then I was no different than the forest. I was just another branch, another mouth, another carving. And maybe I would walk free, but it wouldn't be me anymore. It would never really be me again. So I tore my arm free, turned to Jason and screamed, my voice cracking raw. Take me instead. And the grinding stopped all at once. The silence slamming down, heavy crushing, as every faceless head turned toward me, mouths snapping shut. Jason froze, his smile faltering, his eyes flickering dimmer for just a breath. And then the roar came back louder than ever. But this time it wasn't from the faceless things. It was from the ground, from the forest itself. Through asphalt split beneath me, jagged cracks ripping outward, black soil spilling up like blood, and the faceless crowd fell back swaying as the earth opened under my feet, and Jason's voice boomed, no, not enough, not enough. And for the first time I saw fear flicker across his twisted face, and I understood. He had never truly given himself willingly. He had been taken. He had been broken. And that was why he burned yellow and gray and black. Because he hadn't chosen. He hadn't traded. He had been consumed. I dropped to my knees, clutching the ground, as the soil pulled me down the hum, rising deafening inside my skull. And Jason screamed again, no forest takes not you, not yet. And he lunged forward, grabbing at me, but the ground swallowed him, too, his body twisting, jerking, as if the roots themselves wrapped him, pulling him apart, shredding him into light and shadow. And his scream stretched high sharp until it cut off, and I was falling alone. The darkness closed around me, endless. No air, no ground, just weight pressing in every direction, and voices whispered close, brushing against my ears, my skin, dozens, hundreds of them, all mine, each one repeating my name over and over, until it lost meaning, until I wasn't sure who I was anymore, and I felt my body unravel, pulling thin, like thread, tugged loose from a sweater, and I knew I was being woven into the forest, becoming another face, another mouth, another voice in the endless hum. Then, light cracked through sudden blinding, a thin line above me widening brighter, brighter until I was choking on air again, sprawled on gravel, coughing dirt out of my lungs. And when I blinked the blur away, I was lying in the real parking lot, Craggy Gardens Trailhead, September 17th, 3:40 in the afternoon, the same time I had written down when I started the hike. The same light, the same lot, except empty. Not a single car, not a single face. I pushed myself up, shaking, gasping, and stumbled to my own car, parked exactly where I had left it weeks, maybe hours before the hood. Clean, no carvings, the gas tank full, like I had just pulled in, and for a second, I thought maybe it had all been some fever dream, some hallucination born from dehydration or fear. But when I opened the door and slid inside, I saw it sitting on the passenger seat, a photograph, damp, crumpled edges, stained dark, the same one of Jason and his parents smiling at the overlook. My hands shook as I picked it up, because it meant it had been real, all of it. And when I turned it over, I saw new words scratched rough across the back, not in ink, not in pencil, but carved deep into the paper itself. Letters gouged by something sharp, and it said in jagged lines, "You chose forest, knows, forest keeps." I dropped the photo like it burned and started the engine, my hands trembling, the wheels slick with sweat, and I drove out of the lot, tires spitting gravel onto the empty asphalt road, winding down the mountain, and the whole way my chest felt hollow, my ears ringing with faint whispers that wouldn't stop, no matter how loud I turned the radio, no matter how fast I drove. And when I finally made it home, stumbling into my apartment, collapsing onto the couch, I thought maybe it would fade, maybe time would wear it down into something I could doubt, but it didn't. The whispers are still there every night when I try to sleep. Low, steady, grinding teeth behind the walls, behind the mirror, behind my skull. And every morning I wake to new carvings on the wood of my desk, the frame of my door, my own initials deeper, sharper, dripping dark. I don't know how long I have before it comes for me, completely, before I'm just another face in the bark, another voice in the hum, another reflection pressing against glass. But I know this much for sure: the forest doesn't let go once it knows your name, and now it knows yours too.